Good evening. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. This is tape number 395, June 29th, 1979, in the side one of that tape. I started the tape last week with some comments about the CIA pilfering the files of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and I want to make a few more comments about that. I just briefly talked about it at the beginning of tape number 394. For those of you who don't have that tape, there was an article across the wire services. It was pretty well covered in the country, different versions of it, of how the House Select Committee on Assassinations last July caught an agent from the Central Intelligence Agency going through their files and exhibits and documents on the Kennedy assassination. The Washington Post had quite a long article, longer than the first one that we got out here, the CIA rifling of the Congressional Committee's files, and the article says that they were aimed at getting the CIA off the hook, that they were looking through the documentation and they were investigating it to see what they could get out of it for themselves. Interesting comment by Mr. Lardner in the Washington Post. G. Robert Blakey, the chief investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, said, this is a quotation, "The one thing that would have done us in, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, would have been for those photos of John Kennedy to be publicly released. We were never satisfied that someone else wasn't involved." Now that's an interesting statement for G. Robert Blakey, who did such a good work of covering up who killed the President of the United States and who killed Martin Luther King, that at this stage of the game, coming out in June of 1979 and saying we were never satisfied that someone else wasn't involved. The article went on to say that the most sensitive files were rifled and the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming, that there was more than a curiosity. The original cover-up by Mr. Turner of the CIA was that there was a curiosity on a particular guard to take a peek at the information, but the later articles said that the CIA officer went into a room. He wasn't supposed to be there. He opened a safe. He pulled out a drawer. He took out a ring binder notebook from the drawer. He ripped open a plastic case from the notebook. He took pictures of the contents out of the plastic case, and the original charge of just being curious is hardly able to describe the situation of what he was doing. It's similar to Watergate, burglary, breaking into the Democratic headquarters and taking pictures of information inside their files. The CIA has been accused of conducting a short-sighted, self-protective investigation of the Kennedy assassination. Mr. Blakey retorted with that and said if it was just curiosity, why didn't the agent just look at the photos? Why did he have to take pictures of them? The safe also contained that controversial magic bullet that was supposed to have gone through the body of John Kennedy and John Connally and came out pristine. That was among the evidence that was locked up. The autopsy photographs of the headshot that killed John Kennedy were taken out of the slip cases. They were, in quotes, left disarray inside the three-drawer safe. The CIA agent was given a lie detector test and asked if he was ordered into the safe, and he failed that answer. Robert Blakey has revealed that after July, when the gentleman from the CIA was caught in the files, it gave him more leverage for information on Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassination, and that the CIA then coughed up information about Oswald and his visit to Mexico in September of 1963. Well, if they gave it anything to Robert Blakey, they certainly didn't share it with the American people, because that's still a hushed-up area as are all the other areas that they went into. Mr. Blakey says that after they caught the CIA pilfering and photographing, there was a marked improvement of their relationships, and he got, in quotes, everything we wanted. Well, he never wanted very much from the beginning, so I guess he got what he wanted. The CIA didn't offer much, and Blakey didn't ask for much. There were several people that they were going to test or ask about whether they ordered this agent in. One is CIA Deputy Director Frank Carlucci, but I don't know if he was given a polygraph test. I doubt it. And then there's another one, Scott Breckenridge, a CIA from the Inspector General's office. he was the liaison to the Senate committee in 1975-76 that was investigating the CIA with Senator Church. And, of course, Mr. Breckinridge's average of batting out people that whose names could be on those sheets of paper was pretty good. Right after the testimony of Sheffield Edwards, he died, William Harvey died, John Rosselli died, Sam Giancana never testified, William Sullivan of Division 5 of the FBI died, a large number of the assassination team, George de Mohrenschildt, Carlos Prios-Sequeira. There was a whole rash of deaths around the time of the Senate intelligence investigation, and there was some suspicion that maybe Scott Breckinridge, the Inspector General, had sent this agent in to photograph or snoop around, or whether they're blackmail purposes or plant evidence inside the House Select Committee files. For whatever reasons, they were photographing and they weren't supposed to be in there, and the CIA was caught surreptitiously pulling another type of Watergate operation that they're not supposed to be doing, particularly since the files go back to the CIA anyway. I don't know why they had to do it at the time. It seems that they were playing games with G. Robert Blakey, but in any event, in their desperation to see what was going on, they had to break into the offices, and I just thought I'd add this little bit of information to what we had last week. The 1980 elections are getting started with a bang-bang and almost a death of another candidate. Jimmy Carter has survived 2 assassination attempts so far. Ted Kennedy was almost killed on an airplane, a plane that crashed in Cape Cod, Flight 248, described June the 18th, 1979. A pilot was killed and 9 survive a Massachusetts plane crash. The airline said that Senator Ed Kennedy had been on board the scheduled flight immediately preceding this one, and the plane that crashed was the one that he had taken the last weekend that goes evidently from Hyannisport back to Washington or New York City. It's a short flight. It's one that he takes frequently, particularly in the summer. Everything was peeled off the plane, and if it had caught fire, nobody would have survived. 9 victims went to Cape Cod Hospital. The pilot is dead. He was Air New England senior pilot and vice president of the company, and according to the newspaper reports, everything was normal until the crash. Ted Kennedy survived a airplane crash in 1964 with serious back injuries, but he almost got it this time. Reminds me of Lieutenant Merv Dimely, Lieutenant Governor Merv Dimely of California, taking a Sunday plane when he was scheduled for a Monday morning that went into San Diego with a fatal plane crash took place last September. So Ted Kennedy, I'm sure, got a message on that one and a close call, but that seems to be par for the course for elections. Now, one of the most dangerous men running for office, I think it's a toss-up with Reagan managed by Paul Laxalt, with the Howard Hughes Summa Power Corporation behind that till, and Mr. Bush, who was director of the CIA under Gerald Ford, John Connally, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of the Navy, up to his ears with information on the Kennedy assassination and the Tyrol Bay complex of Permindex, traveling around with that kind of intellectual baggage. And along with those candidates, there's General Haig, who retired from NATO today, and he's supposed to have had a car crash, very interesting car crash. I call it the launching of his political career. Haig jumped 30 or 40 positions in the Army. He was handpicked by Henry Kissinger and the Chase Manhattan Bilderberger Society. He's been the head of NATO, the darling of that clique in the East, and, of course, running for dictator of the world in 1980. If he could make it, he would love it. And what better way to announce his political career than what Adolf Hitler used, a little Reichstag violence to come down on the terrorists. He got through this car accident in which nobody was hurt, nobody went to a hospital, everybody was cleared. He got immediate media attention. He got the best publicity he could get. He came on in sympathy because he was the victim of a near assassination attack, like Gerald Ford was with Sarah Moore and Squeaky Fromm. You notice that the right wing, the extreme right wing, never dies. You don't see anybody shooting Ronald Reagan or Evel Young or Ed Davis or people like Haig or Connally. They don't die. It's only the left or the center left or the peacemakers that die. these guys seem to walk away from it, and then he has this Me Too, the terrorists after Me Too. First headlines from Haig were General Haig escapes terrorist bombing. Another one, General Haig escapes mystery blast in Belgium. Another one, Haig narrowly escapes attempt to murder him. He came out and said it was a landmine, and then he says, gosh, it was a close one. He uses the word gosh. And he described the rear of his car that was damaged, and he said, I feel that I was the target of a specific organization, but he couldn't make any clues, and there were no arrests. That was the first day's reportage. The second day got a little more interesting. By June the 27th, this is one headline, Slow Start in Probe on Attempt to Kill Haig. I asked, why the slow start? Why not jump out after them? They said something, the detonation went off, you could run after them. I'm afraid they don't want to arrest their own, and the headline was saying, to find a suspect, it will take a long time, and they're going to have a slow time finding it. The quotation was, the investigation will be long and difficult. Another quotation, the bomb didn't bear the readily identifiable signature of any one of the major terrorist groups. Of course not. Not if it's an agent provocateur, and the other terrorists would deny it, and they had to come up with the evidence. The officials were reserved, according to one article, and said the attack had several confusing aspects. There isn't anything confusing when you think of the way that political campaigns through the media and through the use of these bombs are very effective, or these near-death scares of people on the right. The article on the slow start of the probe said that other passengers were not hurt. There were no notes claiming responsibility, and the bomb was described as a curious mixture of professional and primitive. They'll say some guerrillas did it. It was so primitive. The investigation of the, in quotes, mystery blast will take a long time, because they'll have to come up with an answer. If it isn't an agent provocateur, a Reichstag kind of phony baloney, here's me, I'm running, look, they're trying to kill me, but I won't be afraid, I'm coming home, and I've withstood the fires of near death. That's General Haig's entree into the American presidential election, and I'm sure that he'll keep it up, and he won't be killed, and he'll be strong and alive like all the other people running right alongside of him. Another article, the New York Times, and this is important, begins headlines, quotes, investigators lack clear clues in bomb attack on Haig. American officials said there were many unanswered questions about the method of attack. There's speculations that persons or a group of unknown to the anti-terrorist forces could have been responsible for the attack. The police have examined the worker's helmet and a vacuum bottle near the bomb site, but haven't indicated they found any fingerprints. The next thing I expect to find is a letter from the SLA, a new unknown terrorist group that has come from nowhere and has jeopardized the great General Haig. Another note on the 1980 elections. This is the Washington Post, June 24th, 1979. If Reagan would accept GOP vice president nomination, you bet he would accept the vice president. He's plenty sorry he didn't do it last time, and I don't think Jerry Ford would have selected him, because Ford knew then if they both won, Ford would be killed. It would have been another John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson combination, and Ford, as I've said on other tapes before, was up all night and made the final decision he would take Dole even if he lost, and that certainly was a wise decision. Now Ronald Reagan is coming out and saying that, yes, he'd take the second nomination in 1980 under Senator Howard Baker, John Connally, or George Bush, all those three men from the Central Intelligence Agency, and Laxalt running Reagan's campaign from the CIA. So you really are getting every single candidate has been with the CIA and has worked himself up to become president of the United States. Reagan said that he'll be glad to be vice president, and if the occasion comes, he wouldn't turn it down. If something were to happen, he would fill the bill. He said, I don't want the job, but if it was a call to duty and you felt you could help, I don't know anyone who could refuse it. This is a guy that's been trained and feathered and propped up with the publicity and the pancake. His face must be peeling off with pancake and layers of makeup, running for this presidency for years. The grooming of Ronald Reagan parallels the grooming of Richard Nixon. And with such modesty, he says, I don't know anyone who could refuse it. So he will take second position and then help the guy who gets on top, because I still feel that Reagan can work his way in, whether it's through bullets or blackmail. If he takes a second position, he'll be president someday. There was an article in the Washington Post this week. I don't know how many of you read the Post, so I think it's very important to quote the sources. And it has to do with a subject I've talked about many times before, my friend Adolf Hitler. It has to do with that great Nazi Gustav Wagner, who's 68 years old, and the Brazilian court decided that they wouldn't extradite Wagner for trials in 4 countries. He came to Brazil with Franz Stangl in the 1950s. He was commanding officer in the Sobibor and Treblinka concentration camps, and the Brazilian police have protected him. Mr. Wagner was photographed April 1978, and for those of you that have these earlier tapes from a year ago, I think I've talked about this since May of 1978, that a photographer took a scene of what they call the neo-Nazi, but it's a continuation of the regular Nazis. There's a neo-Nazi Congress that meets every year, and according to the Washington Post, it was held in Brazil to celebrate the birthday of Adolf Hitler. Now, they didn't say to celebrate the birthday of the late Adolf Hitler. This party's been written up many times. I was told by 2 sources close to the Central Intelligence Agency in Argentina and in Brazil 2 times last year, one towards the end of the year and one shortly after, around May or June of 1978, I was told, it may be wrong, that Hitler attended that party. But somebody took a picture of Mr. Wagner, and he went immediately to the Brazilian police, and he said, protect me. And they have protected him. I was told by these sources, those are my sources, that Hitler had gone to a sanitarium in Switzerland, that he didn't go back to Argentina after the pictures were taken. Wagner realized what happened when his picture was recognized, and he went to the police for protection. And some of you don't believe it, and it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. I'm just going to pass it on for the records that I was told at that point that Adolf went on to Switzerland, where he's in a sanitarium at the present time. Wagner is known as a human beast. He never denied his place in the extermination camps, and he's accused of causing the death of more than 1 million people. Now, 4 countries allegedly wanted him, and there are 4 countries that were given excuses for not releasing him. Incidentally, he came to Brazil and worked for the Volkswagen Motor Company and has a high position and is very wealthy and works, I believe, in the Volkswagen Motor Car Company. I read just yesterday or 2 days ago that they're trying to buy Chrysler Corporation in the United States. 4 countries were supposed to ask for him. Israel, they turned them down. They said, you can't have him because your war crimes were committed before 1948, and you didn't become a country until 48. Therefore, you can't have him to try him. Austria, you can't have him because you stripped him of his citizenship after the war and said he's no longer a citizen. Poland, where the Treblinka and Sobibor concentration camps are, on Polish soil, they said you can't have him because there was a deficiency in your extradition papers filed by the Polish government. Because there was a deficiency. That's like a weak prosecution of Dan White or John Mitchell or Maurice Stans or John Connolly. The Polish government didn't ask very hard, and their presentation was so poor. Ask the Polish Pope about that one. The deficiency in their extradition papers means they would not return him to Poland, and their excuse for not returning him to Germany was that they cited the statute of limitations had run out. Now, it was my opinion that the statutes run out in December of 79. This is June 1979, but this is double talk. It doesn't make sense, but those are the reasons that 4 countries couldn't have him, and now he's back on his estate doing business as usual. This is the man from Treblinka concentration camps who accepts the responsibility for 1 million or more murders and torture and so forth of these various people. But the Brazilian government intends to keep him there, and every year there's been a reunion of those Nazis, and next year the statute of limitations is over. The new president of Germany is a Nazi, and they will be home, and nobody will be punished. They will be protected with watchdogs and security guards all of their lives. Last week I talked about alternative 3 on tape number 395, but I didn't have space on the paper and the sheet that it goes with the tape. I gave a long sheet because there was too much material to get onto the shorter sheet, and I'm going to do it again this week because just as I gave you my classification files for Jonestown, I'm giving you these sections that I'm breaking the space articles that I have into, where I can keep some eye on what is going on with the satellite space shuttles and see if we can break open this document called Alternative 3 and find out what parts of it are true or untrue. Bob Trevor, a radio announcer on KGO, tried all last week to get in touch with Jodrell Bank and find out whether Sir William Valentine actually worked there before. That's a famous institution in Great Britain for astronomers studying astronomy, and those are the foremost experts in the world just about. And on the evening of the 24th of June, he spoke to a Mr. T.W. Rackham at Jodrell Bank and asked if there was a Sir William Valentine who worked there as an astronomer, because of the allegations in this book that Valentine worked there and had been killed in a car crash. And we're trying to find these people and say, no, the book is hogwash, or part of it is true, or all of it's true, because we don't know. So Mr. Rackham answered the telephone at Jodrell Bank and said, I can't answer you. I can't give out any information without the approval of my superiors. Call back Tuesday, because Bob's on the air at 1 in the morning, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday out here on the West Coast from 1 to 5. So Tuesday, Monday afternoon, I called Bob Trevor at his home around 5 p.m., and he said, I'll be talking to Jodrell Bank this evening or early morning at 1 a.m. and find out about Alternative 3, whether it's fiction or not. And he said, I'll be on the air. They'll be on the air early this morning. It's afternoon over in England, and you listen. So I stayed up, anxious to know if the book Alternative 3 is fiction or nonfiction. Because when I publish articles, I have to give documentation and back up the allegations I make, and I thought that Avon Press would check these out. So I stayed up, and there wasn't anything mentioned about Jodrell Bank, and Bob wasn't able to get in touch with him. But the next evening, he did get in touch with him, and he got them on the telephone in England, and they told him that there was no Sir William Valentine. They never heard of Valentine, but they would not go on the air. Nobody could be interviewed, and they were not allowed to discuss the matter. That kind of unnerved Bob Trevor, because I think he wanted to believe the book is fiction, and he wanted them to categorically get on the air and be identified and denounce the book. But there are faceless people, voiceless people, who would not allow themselves to be taped or quoted, said they don't know Valentine, but there is no way that they could get on the air and say that the statements they were making then were in fact the truth. Alternative 3 is available in the bookstores, and Tom Davis has it out here at Research. You have the address. I've given it on a lot of the other sheets before, and I'll give it one more time if you want to order it from him. I'm not saying the book is factual, but I want to find out if space stations exist, if they're planning genocide or slave labor, or if 90% of the population is anticipated to be shipped up there. I want to know, and I have a right to know, and particularly with Nazi scientists working with the CIA, I have a right to know how much of this book is true, and I'm not going to be put down by these particular people that say, avoid this, don't get into it. I want to know, and the more evasive they are, the more angry I get. I've faced famous denials. I've heard J. Edgar Hoover say that Lee Harvey Oswald killed John Kennedy, and that those people that questioned it were crazy. We're used to the Attorney General lying under oath. We're used to the President of the United States lying under oath. And I'm not going to accept a faceless, voiceless person telling Bob Trevor he doesn't know who Valentine was, but he can't give his name. The chief at Jodrell Bank can't give their name, can't go on the air, and can't denounce a book which is sold as nonfiction. Their silence is worse These nameless people are eerie. I think they're eerie, and I think Bob had the same feeling. I think we have to get to the responsibility of this matter, and this week I called Nancy Neiman at Avon Press. I tried to get her last week, and I haven't had any satisfaction, and this involves a very difficult question for researchers. Are fiction books sold as nonfiction? Where do we get our truth? Because we assume that some of this is checked out. The publishers and legal department check this out. If people are going to do research, and the books that they use as source information are really fiction sold as nonfiction, is there any responsibility for the book publishers? Is there any responsibility if I quote them and get sued? I think we have a right to know who has control of our facts. This is very basic to the future investigative journalism and playing with our minds to know whether these are facts or fiction. It's a very important point. I think of George Orwell in 1984. He wrote, "If thoughts corrupt language, language also corrupts thoughts." And there were some quotations from Oceana that maybe are worth repeating when we talk about this. Orwell said the key to Oceania's control of its population is the manipulation of its language. Speech has been deliberately debased to the point where it's meaningless. To prevent unorthodox thoughts from entering the minds of party members, a completely new language is created to make political heresy impossible. At Jodrell Bank, they said, "There is no Sir William Sullivan, but we're not allowed to answer your questions. We're not allowed to make comment." And Orwell said Newspeak was created, or will be created, to make political heresy impossible due to the lack of words to convey unsanctioned ideas. Newspeak makes political heresy impossible due to a lack of words. You can't find these people if they won't come forward and say something, but they control your thinking, because if you question them, they can call you paranoid or off on a limb, but they won't stand up and take a position and defend their position. And Orwell said that Newspeak is, quotes, created to make political heresy impossible due to the lack of words to convey an unsanctioned idea. The ability to believe two contradictory statements simultaneously without perceiving the illogic inherent in such a position. What we're getting here are two contradictory statements, or tantamount to that, without perceiving the illogic inherent in such a position. When they say there is no Sir William Valentine, they should just look you in the face and say there's no Sir William Valentine. But when they say we have orders not to talk about it and we can't get on the air, it's similar to Richard Nixon getting on national television and saying, "Let me make this perfectly clear," and then he lies at the press conference. He makes it perfectly clear, and then he tells a lie. That's the kind of reaction that's coming out of Jodrell Bank in England, which, as I say, arouses my curiosity and anger at the same time. I'm going to do the remaining side of this tape and the other side on a continuation of some things that I didn't get on the last tape on Alternative 3. I want to talk about a sickening prospect with you. I'm going to ask questions of this one. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to tell you my worst thoughts about it and share them with you and explain why I feel this way about it. There have been many articles about people who've been abducted by UFOs, by so-called alien creatures. They're all taken immediately to doctors for hypnosis to remember what they saw in case they forgot the details. Their description of the people that they see are very similar all around the world. There was a recent article that just came out about a couple that was examined by alien creatures. This was a few years ago, actually, John and Sue Day. They described pink-eyed humanoids. Some were 7 feet tall. Some were squat, ugly aliens, short ones. And they had humanoid characteristics. They didn't talk. There were 3 short, ugly people, 3 feet tall. And then, as I say, these older people with the pink eyes, described as pink eyes. No eyelids. People all over the world are seeing these beings with no eyelids, very tight skin, pale skin, and they don't speak to the people, but they communicate in whatever way, or with their mannerisms or their hands, and seem to direct them. And a lot of the people who've seen them are followed by what they call the black men that come to the house, remove things from the home, and take away traces or evidence of these visits. On the other side of this tape, I'm going to share with you my opinion about what is happening to these creatures, and it's a pretty sickening idea, but I guess it's time that we face the worst and throw it out and just share it with each other and talk about it. One of my worst fears is that what if these people are genetically mutilated? What if they are humanoids that have been tampered with and are being used for purposes of terror or development for outer space? What if that were happening? Or is it happening? This is Mae Brussell, and this is side 2 of tape number 395, and it's June 29, 1979. When I was attending that conference on UFOs in the Bay Area last April, I began to hear the description, as I say, the people in black that follow up these sightings, and the physical description and similarities of people that are seen. Short, humanoid, short arms, short necks, pointed ears, tight skin, holes for eyes. And I began to think of the psychiatrists that see the people afterwards, that hypnotize them and recount the stories, and wondering who are the cast of characters that would be involved in the UFO situation if they're man-made, like Mr. Valley is saying, if they're not outer space, if they're Nazi space scientists, if they're Nazi doctors. Where is Dr. Mengele's? He's been working on genetics for 40 years. The Boys from Brazil was about that gentleman, if you can call it a gentleman. I take that back. During a crisis period, I guess in the 50s, it's been a while, I forget when, there's a new book out about the thalidomide drugs made by Merrill Richardson, given to people who were pregnant, women who were pregnant. Interesting that pregnant women suffered from the deformities genetically, and their children were born without arms or legs, what they described as fins. And I'm wondering if some of these experiments on these people, because that's been hushed up, we haven't seen photographs of these people since they've grown up. There were thousands of them in communities in Germany and England of the thalidomide children, and we haven't had any follow-up on that, or if it's been used since. But there was an article in Omni magazine that gave me the idea again to think about being genetically altered. It came out in June of 1969, just this last month. It's an article called Problem of Space Laws, and the main subject was on the legal problems of space colonies, and it goes into the problem of quarantine laws, that you have to identify a disease or a characteristic before you can quarantine people. What would you do up there? It'd be horrendous if diseases were brought up. And they go into space problems, particular ethical and legal problems in the next few decades. And then there were some other statements in the article on space laws which caught my interest. It said, permanent space habitats will raise a vast array of ethical and legal problems in the next few decades until our second and third generation of space citizens, extraterrestrial cultures will be shaped purely by economics and by our technological and physiological capabilities. Simply enabling men to live in space could raise some of the most difficult ethical questions man has ever raised or faced. Now, this is a magazine that is specifically, it's put out by Penthouse, I believe, but the whole magazine is on space, and this article is on space law and ethical questions. It said long-term colonists may have to be genetically adapted to survive their synthetic alien environment. Fitting colonists for permanent life in space could require anything from eugenic counseling of the parents to outright genetic engineering, which will be creating, in effect, a new species. Will our first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence come when we meet our own genetically refabricated children? ? No one has the answers, but the question that Omni magazine is asking is what I've been asking myself for a long time, and while I don't like to spend a lot of time in speculation, I do think that that is worth asking when it's asked in a magazine like that in regards to space law and creating a new species. Are we now, at first, until we get our second or third generation, meeting our own genetically refabricated children? Another article along the lines of space law, it said that high pressures will come on the environment of a space colony. It'll demand psychiatric drugs to control undesirable behavior and to erase traumatic memories, I guess the memories of what life was like back on Earth, and even to tailor sexual preferences to suit the colony's population balance. All such manipulative possibilities raise profound ethical and legal issues. I guess if you need more women, you create women. If you want men, you can make men. You can balance the sexuality up there and control the behavior. I think of the batch consignment down in Jonestown and the batch of drugs that were sent down there and how people were kept quiet through drugs, given lobotomies through drugs if they wanted to leave. And they have now begun to discuss erasing traumatic memories. The memories may be sweet of the past, and the present may be downright miserable up there. Another article in May of '69, a month earlier, in Omni magazine on space and the mind, called Revolt in Space. And this article is about having to have cities in space. What will it be like living there? What will happen to the emotions and psyches of people? Now, this isn't science fiction. These are articles based upon studies. There's 3 doctors quoted, Dr. J. Shirley, Dr. Natani, and Dr. Sengel from the Veterans Administration Hospital in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. They were discussing the psyche of people that the Skylab that went up there in 1974, the crew didn't like it. They felt that the place was messed up. They didn't like the food. They didn't like the soap. They didn't like the toilets. They said they were overworked. They were being driven to the walls. And they described several space diseases. One was solipsism syndrome, which is losing grasp of reality that men from NASA get when people are isolated and confused and they begin not to know if they're talking to objects or real people, whether it's their imagination or not. There's another syndrome, it's called Shimana-Gashi, feeling isolated, vaguely uncomfortable, intellectually stilted. It's been used for punishment and isolation of prisoners. And then they're referring to space neurosis, disorientation from being with unfamiliar neighborhoods in space. I don't know whether that's normal. I should think it would be perfectly normal to be unfamiliar. But they call that space neurosis and refer to it as a disease. I don't know who's sick, the people that are planning all this or the people that are going to go up there and have to take it. But they're already categorizing the types of mental illnesses and the possibility of revolt in space. And, of course, the way to save that is to drug people out of their heads or genetically alter them so that they don't know the difference. These doctors from Oklahoma, from the Veterans Hospital, were talking about psychological problems, and they said people who will do the best in space are going to be latent heterosexuals, those with conventional sexual preferences but little need for physical intimacy. And they said these are the same people who survive well at remote weather stations. And I think of the Antarctic and the Arctic and the Alternative 3 talking about secret meetings in submarines. This may be the kind of nursing ground for the UFOs in the Arctic region. There are allegations that it has been. And this article, this is May 1979 in Omni, said our space psychology can be summed up in that you send a man to space, but we, the plural we, have no idea if he's going to want to stay there or come back. So evidently they're doing psychological studies on those best to adapt, the possible breakdowns for being there, the kinds of drugs to solve it, and the genetic mutilations that go along with it. I think this is pretty scary, and I don't know that Omni's a great authority or not, but these doctors are being quoted, just as Gerard O'Neill at Princeton is being quoted, and I choose to just read it. I may not accept all of it, but I'm just going to put it in the back of my mind and keep it there and share it with you. I was driving along the radio, I think it was in the car radio in January of this year, 1979, and I keep a notepad in case I hear something interesting or take notes. And it was a religious show on Sunday morning, and somewhere between 7 and 8 a.m., going up towards San Francisco. And a gentleman was telling how NASA and the military were going to solve the problems of the world. It was a Christian church service, and this man said that he had worked for the peace, similar to the Peace Corps, and went into the Middle East to try and make a gap between the Muslims and the Jews. Well, of course, the intelligence community and the Pentagon have always wanted factions divided, fighting each other, divide and conquer, and that's pretty dangerous to want peace between Muslims and Jews. And then he went on to say that he was taken to a hospital for 2 years. He didn't say he broke a back or broke a leg or had a breakdown or anything. He said he was taken to a hospital, and he didn't name it or what it was, but when he got out of the hospital, he was transformed. He said, in quotes, "When I got out of the hospital, I knew that the U.S. military and that NASA had the solution for world peace." He said it has to do with weapons and the space program, but he turned to NASA and the military and realized that if people would accept their solution, that we would have peace on the earth, and that they had come across a new idea for peace. He got this insight after spending 2 years in a hospital, but he didn't say where he was those 2 years. And I think it's interesting how he was selling NASA's interpretation of peace on a Christian program linked to the military hospital where he stayed. That's where he got his insight, that they had the solutions and that we should follow them. Alternative 3 talks about missing people, missing scientists, missing space experts, and so forth. I have an article here, 2 articles that you might have missed, and I want to be sure that you get them because there's been no follow-up, and I'm always interested in these articles that are left dangling without anything to announce afterwards that the problem is solved. One was in the Dallas Times-Herald, April 21st, 1979, 2 U.S. jet fighters missing for 8 days. They had been missing since April the 12th. 2 Air Force pilots missing more than a week, a massive search, U-2 reconnaissance, helicopters, and so forth. The aircraft went out, and 2 pilots were turned up missing. They're still missing. This was quite a while ago, printed April the 21st, 1979. It's from the Dallas Times-Herald. A Captain Michael G. Humphreys from Dallas, and he was last heard from returning to Holloman Air Force Base near New Mexico. The other missing pilot is Captain Pollock of Idaho, who checked off from White Sands facility, and the Pentagon officials said they had no record of them. The incident occurred in New Mexico, where Humphreys and Pollock were involved in Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada as a special Air Force unit, and they went out, the 2 went out together. There was one report from the Pentagon that said maybe the 2 fighters collided, or maybe they simultaneously flew into a mountainside. Now, we're getting a lot of simultaneous. It's like G. Robert Blakey saying that 2 gunmen simultaneously hit a John Kennedy who didn't know each other, possibly. That's the, if you're going to have a second gunman at the fence and Lee Harvey Oswald at a window, and they're both shooting, but Oswald did the fatal bullet. Maybe it was a simultaneous and not worked out together. The Pentagon said they have no direct evidence that this is simultaneous. There's no radio transcripts from either pilot, and they were very skilled pilots, and the military and civil air patrol sent over 200 sorties over the New Mexico terrain and couldn't find them. That was April 21st, 1979. May 1979, search for missing Air Force pilots. Planes proved fruitless. They never came in on the new frequency. They disappeared from the radar screens. We conducted a thorough air search. Civil Air Patrol, Air Force helicopters, special C-130 electronic control ships. They've looked for them. The last radar contact in the area didn't find a thing. And since April, these two top pilots have been missing. There's no reason with all of that equipment not to find a splinter from two airplanes, but they're gone, evidently completely gone, unless they've gone on to some other war games or spaceships. These planes are missing. I received an article from the New York Post from one of the listeners back in New York. I always appreciate getting these from all of you. I constantly get new articles coming in, and I can't use them all at the same time, but eventually I hope I get to them. This one is for the New York Post, May the 7th, 1979, the boy who came back from the dead. It's not a boy, it's a college student. He disappeared for 15 months. He went on a cross-country skiing trip to Massachusetts, and he can't remember anything that happened. He's 24 years old. He vanished from the shores of Lake Michigan in 1978, and he woke up on a Saturday night in Massachusetts in a field of grass, and he said, "I didn't know where I was or how I got there." He bought a newspaper. He thought it was 1978. He had no memory, and he doesn't know at all how he ended up in this field, and evidently there are no people that have been taking care of him who came forward and said that they had been taking care of him. He said he went out one evening and it was very cold. He was a college senior. He'd gotten a degree in German in absentia. Evidently they thought he had died. Gave him a college degree. He told his roommate that he was going on a skiing trip and disappeared, and all of a sudden the Massachusetts police found him, and he was laying in the field and with absolutely no memory of what happened to his experience. Now, I heard at one conference an article about UFOs and discussion about people losing time, that they'll start out, say, from an area like San Francisco to Sacramento, and it'll take 5 hours to get there. There's a big hunk of time missing, and they say they went continuously, but they've been diverted somewhere and were kept and then put back on the road. And people who are having appearances with space ships or memory of spaceships are also having memory losses, and there's a lot of material being published, articles on that, and of course you wonder where this person was, that all of a sudden he wakes up in a field and finds that a whole year is gone. When he woke up in this field, he had hitchhiking signs from Ohio, Reno, Chicago, Sacramento, a map of San Francisco, a book of Confucius, a poetry book, and swimming goggles, even though he says he was never a swimmer, and running shoes and so forth that were in a backpack, and he can't account, a college student can't account for his time. We all know that there is a disease called amnesia, but usually a person who suffers from that disease doesn't know who he is, and he's picked up and placed and located. The family will request, if there's a missing person, they'll put out a feeler and usually find a person suffering from amnesia. I think the phenomena that's taking place around the country with some of the articles that I'm reading and receiving from other people is a possibility that somebody is playing around with their lives or their minds, that certain circumstances are entering in beyond their control. And when you read the documents of the CIA and their experimentations and their goals for the last 30 years, it's easy to see that there may be many more victims of experimentation that we even dream that there are, because if you read the budget that they have and the technology and the goals, then some of the products of all those efforts are walking the streets, and it's hard to separate which are the ones that are suffering from being tampered with psychologically. When a system makes up its mind, it's going to find out how you react under all these circumstances. You don't know who the victims are. The Air Force has a new chief. This is June 23rd, 1979. German-born nuclear scientist by the name of Hans Mark, M-A-R-K. When Dr. Hans Mark moves his things across a Pentagon hall from the office of the Air Force Undersecretary to the larger suite as Air Force Secretary, he will have a blackboard and a blue model of the space shuttle. The German-born academic likes to sketch the points of each argument on the blackboard. The space shuttle is to remind visitors that the Air Force for the last 2 decades of the century will be a space force. Space shuttle craft are painted white. Mark ordered the blue one to emphasize the Air Force role in the joint military-civilian program. He's done more than anyone else to stimulate interest in space, an Air Force general said. He has been Undersecretary of the Air Force. He was Director of NASA Ames Research in Mountain View, California, with a Ph.D. from University of California and MIT, and he is coming from UC Davis, the Defense Department, to become the new Air Force chief who has, in quotes, his eye on space. Mr. Mark wanted to cut a new Panama Canal with nuclear explosives, but that was stopped in 1965. As Air Force Secretary, he'll be in charge of logistical and personnel programs, and he resigned as Air Force Secretary. He was born in Mannheim, Germany in 1929. He came to this country and became a citizen in 1945, probably one of the Project Paperclip scientists. Dr. Hans Mark, German-born nuclear scientist, will be the new Air Force chief with his eye on space stations and space shuttle. The failure of Skylab to stay up in space is blamed on the United States not giving enough money or interest in the space program. There's an article, Nations Leadership Decried for Flaws in Space Program. Skylab didn't have to fall. This is according to the National Space Institute. It didn't have to fall. It represents the historic and continuing failure of this nation's executive leadership to provide the space program with long-range goals and objectives, along with the necessary funding. Well, you can be sure if Ronald Reagan or Senator Howard Baker or Mr. Bush or John Connally gets in, they will have all the funding they want for all the space programs that they want. They're blaming the bad job of Skylab on the executive leadership. They can use it as a campaign issue and make sure that they get everything they need if they can get the Republicans in as president in 1980. And with a Democratic Jimmy Carter, they could probably get all that they need. But the descent of Skylab is being blamed on weak executives that didn't give them all the money and the muscle they needed. As articles come in, and I've received a lot of them from you since I brought up the subject of Alternative 3, as they come in, you can see the categories that I have listed on this sheet, and I'll put them into the proper structures. An example, say number 3 on the sheet, the denial of public officials or the avoidance of answers. I'll put the one about Judwell Bank and their reaction to the question on Dr. Valentine. Way down there in space, of course, all of NASA is Nazi because it was the Nazi space scientists that began the space program. But 19B, I have a section called Nazis and NASA Yesterday, Today, and the Use of Control. I have an article by Army General John Medeiros. He was the right-hand man of Adolf Hitler. He spearheaded the American drive into space, and he had an article, not too long ago, it was in 1978, saying the Lord advised him how to run the nation's rocket and satellite effort. In 1957, he was Major General at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. In January 1958, he helped with Wernher von Braun launch the German rocket that was made in America. They brought them over here and then continued to make them in Alabama. He launched an 18-pound satellite. He said, von Braun and I were in a race then against the Russians with space as the prize, and God helped him work. He asked the Lord for help in directing the space program, and God was a constant source of guidance and advice, and they launched Explorer 1. Dr. von Braun and Mr. Medeiros, John Medeiros, brought over here from Germany, worked on the space program with the help of God. Another Nazi that's active in the space program, his name is Kraft Erich, E-H-R-I-C-K-E. I got a biography of Mr. Erich and his background in one page from a book called Our Extraterrestrial Heritage, From UFOs to Space Colonies, put out by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Personal information, Dr. Erich started his rocketry and space career in 1942 on the German V-2 rocket development at Peenemünde. He came to this country in 1945. Through 1952, he worked in the U.S. Army's missile and rocket development. From 52 to 54, he was assistant project engineer on long-range glide rocket studies for Bell Aircraft. He subsequently joined Convair for the development of Atlas ICBMs. and so forth. He has written an article on exo-industrial productivity, on extraterrestrial imperative of our time, and the gist of the summary that he has on this one page from this one brochure of a conference where he spoke was that, this is in quotes, despite unparalleled advances in scientific understanding and technology and capability, humanity is threatened by hunger, poverty, pollution, and worsening shortages of raw material and energy. And he goes into the need and development of space colonies. This is what is going on over and over again, repetition in these articles, and it all may be true. Threatened by hunger, threatened by poverty, threatened by pollution, and shortages of energy and raw material, they have to build these colonies. Now, I believe that the technology and the money that we have would clean up all these things if they wanted it to. I think that this is genocidal and that they're going to use the money for another purpose to remove the people that are doing the polluting, who are impoverished, who are hungry, and so forth, and just keep enough slave labor for the drawing up of the energy and those resources. But this particular man worked with Werner von Braun. He came over on the Project Paperclip. And the important thing is that these scientists are not using any of that technology to solve the problems on planet Earth. They don't want to clean it up. They don't care about it. They want to rule the world. They want to rule it from up there. They don't care how they do it or how many people die or the pollution that's created to do it. The main thing is that they want control. They've wanted it since the days of Adolf Hitler. And the way they're going to do it is through the rockets and the weapons and the space colonies. And the more I reread my articles of what I have, and the more I read of what's coming in, after reading Alternative 3, it makes sense, and I'm sorry I wasn't more systematic about saving the space articles. I wasn't too interested until recently on the intent and just how they could be used. I know there's some diabolical ways they could be used, the satellites, and I have plenty of information on that. But it was only in February when I got Alternative 3 that I realized how far gone we are in even thinking of stopping these people because of their intent and their technology. I talked at a great deal on KGO and on several other radio stations about the book Alternative 3 and the missing people and the allegations of missing people. And right after I started talking about that and after the UFO conference in San Francisco where they were very evasive about the subject of these space colonies when it was hard to even get a question asked, even though there were about 20 people in the audience. Right after that, there's a full-page, half-page ad in the San Jose Mercury, and I sent some of you a copy of this. If others want it, write to me, send a self-addressed stamped envelope, a large-size envelope, and I'll copy this article for you. It's put out by Ford Aerospace Communications Corporation. Ford Motor Company has a Aerospace Communications Corporation, and the title of the ad, it's a half-page ad, is called Missing Persons Bulletin. And on the left, there's sort of an English bowler hat, a quiet-looking, sleazy little guy, a silhouette, dark against a white background, and he's saying cartoon style, do you fit this description? And it says All Points Bulletin. The San Jose Mercury ad, it was May the 16th, 1979. All Points Bulletin for talented individuals. Does that mean all over the world? Does that mean from England or Ireland or New Zealand? Is it to work in a stimulating, high-technology environment is what they're looking for. And then they have in the corner rewards for discovery and subsequent employment. Does that mean kidnapping people, finding them, turning them into this organization? And the rewards for discovery and subsequent employment, if somebody stays, is that they get outstanding benefits, a Ford car purchasing plan, 12 paid holidays, tuition assistance, 100% medical and dental insurance premium for the employees and their dependents, their entire families, 100%. And then it goes into some of the skills that they need, and they list they want technicians, financial assistance, operation support systems, electrical and mechanical engineering, microwave design, advanced composites for buildings, develop new composite materials for satellite structural applications, must be familiar with graphite, KVR, tooling equipment, manufacturer experience, satellite propulsion. This obviously was for a satellite antenna design, spacecraft power system, microwave design, satellite transponders, and so forth. It's an ad for technical writers on space, people familiar with thermal control components, network control engineers, communication engineers, microwave designs, as I say, and composites for satellite structure applications, which must mean satellite buildings. They've got a Palo Alto address and a phone number, but the top of the article, the advertisement, which caught my eye after receiving Alternative 3 in February, and this was in May of 1979, was the ad, Missing Persons Bulletin. And do they get their employees or their suckers by swooping in on the missing persons? I believe that might be too obvious, but anything is possible these days, and I'm reading the words a little closer and looking behind the print a little closer and picking up a lot of clues and things that I passed over in the past that I maybe should have taken more time with. I have just a minute before closing on this tape to talk about Jonestown, the death of one primary witness, and the death threat upon Charles Gary. Charles Gary was the attorney who represented Jonestown through a lot of hectic years where people were trying to expose Jim Jones, and he was sitting on the lid with Mark Lane, and they were both down there when over 900 people died, and they walked away. Charles Gary's life has been threatened. The Los Angeles Times said ex-Black Panther lawyer threatened. They didn't say Jonestown lawyer. Kathy Hunter died. She was one of the first people from the Ukiah Daily Journal to expose Jonestown. Mark Lane went to her house disguised as a reporter from Esquire magazine. I believe she was suing him. 59 years old, she died in a San Francisco hospital, described in quotes as bleeding ulcer and other physical problems. She went as far as Georgetown, couldn't get into Jonestown, was told she'd be killed. She was the victim of bomb scares in her hotel by members of People's Temple, and she returned back to Ukiah. Kathy Hunter was exposing Jonestown. 59 years old, she died June 27th, 1979. I believe their hit squad is succeeding and will erase people that know too much about Jonestown. Our time is up again. I'm sorry it goes so fast. I always have so much more to share with you, but I guess that's all we can put into a 1-hour tape. I'll be back with you next week. You take care. And this is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California.